Hey guys, it's Matthew here once again. Haven't posted anything in a few days. Been, deciding if I was going to try last Epoch, finishing off a previous build on Path of Exile, and yeah, in the end have decided to try last Epoch and have been doing that for a few days. So I've got a video here that's going to be kind of in two parts. One, just talking about the game and I guess my first impressions, small kind of review, and then the other part just talking about the actual build I'm playing and how you can copy it as well if you want to. So yeah, the game itself has been out now for almost 3 days. It's been in early access for many years, and I had not looked at it at all up till now. I've only really finally jumped onto trying it after this full release, 1.0, something like that. Typically, like by now, if you kind of know me, I hate starting new games. I don't like feeling like a noob. I don't like learning everything all over again, especially if I feel like I'm playing a game that I'm still very much enjoying and happy to keep playing, which was currently Path of Exile. But if there's a game that does tick all the boxes and is getting a lot of hype and has a big release, and then everyone in my chat is playing it, well, shit, I guess I have to give it a go. And yeah, so far so good. I've not regretted pretty much a single second of it. It has been a good, fun ARPG. And too long didn't watch. It's basically a good step between PoE and Diablo 4. So like Diablo 4, like to try and summarize that, it's very shallow, right? It feels kind of good to play, and it's got some, redeeming things that just give you some dopamine and all that. But at the end of the day, it's pretty bare bones. PoE, super complex, super deep. Can feel good to play, sometimes doesn't. Ultimately, I'd say the gold standard in ARPGs. Whereas this is a bit of a bridging gap between the two. It's a lot closer to PoE than it is D4, in my opinion anyway. Because there's a lot of systems, there's a lot of like things that you can engage in and think about and customize and do for yourself. And then the combat and the play-by-play feels pretty close to D4, but a bit different to PoE in that sense that it's just a little bit more slow-paced, a bit more cooldown-based, some stuff like that. But yeah, to say a bit more about it, more like PoE, it does feel like the devs have basically taken what PoE was and tried to bring it to a more approachable standpoint for the average gamer, for the average ARPG person that's going to try an ARPG anyway. Because it's a lot more intuitive, it's a lot more descriptive, there's a lot less sort of needless complication, which PoE does have, which kind of ties in and eventually leads to the complexity of the game and part of why it's satisfying to put things together. But it's a lot easier to do things in this game like that. You can very much just put a build together on the fly, and it should work at some level without needing too much synergy, without needing too much craziness or thought about whether or not it's even remotely viable, because everything here is pretty much viable as far as I can tell. There's going to be more powerful things, there's going to be less powerful things, but just by and large, whatever you do should work to some extent, and it doesn't take a PhD in ARPGs to understand what's happening. It is a bit overwhelming to begin with because there's a lot to be thrown at you right from the get-go, but I picked up this game with absolutely no knowledge of the game before whatsoever, and it screamed pretty PoE-like stuff to me, so it was very easy to pick up. And I wanted to do a Blessed Hammer build with some hammers, and then Javelin sounded cool, so I basically started speccing into both of those, and next thing we know, I'm a Blessed Hammer build with some Javelins, and I've cleared the campaign comfortably. It was pretty easy for the most part. There was only maybe a couple of fights like this one, and one other maybe. Just a couple of fights that really did anything. Other than that, it was pretty cruisy, and I do think that's largely because I managed to choose a fairly strong, I guess maybe kind of meta build, so maybe other people have a bit more difficulty in that regard. But that might be maybe one of my biggest criticisms or complaints. It does feel a bit easy on the low end, like the campaign, early maps, whatever you want to call them. It is for the most part fairly meaningless. Like my combat, my you know, putting together of stuff didn't feel like it really mattered too much. It was fairly like easy just to get through stuff. It was still fun, it was still satisfying. I'm still learning the game, and there was a lot going into that, so a lot of learning and, you know, decisions to be made, so that was still a lot of fun. But I think once you've you know, done pretty well at the game and gone well enough into knowing what to make a build, is all that, like the campaign and early game and all that, is going to be pretty fucking meaningless all day, every day. But like I said, learning it for the first time, going through it for the first time, and trying to understand all the systems, it was still fun. It's still pretty engaging, and that's one of the big differences that I noticed from Diablo 4, at least. It's engaging right from the get-go. You are making decisions, things you do matter, and you are making a build right from the get-go. Like, you actually have some sort of agency over what you're doing. You can kind of do a lot in this game towards making your own characters, to making your own builds. Very reminiscent of Path of Exile, but a bit easier to understand and a bit easier to step towards immediately and initially. And as I found more items, as I engaged more with the crafting system, as I found more uniques, it really did seem to me like it was an attempt at bridging the gap between a Path of Exile and a more friendly ARPG to the average consumer, because you could definitely start making your own builds. You can definitely change things up as much as you want to based off of the items you find pretty quickly, pretty easily, and then try a lot of different things out and eventually fall into what you might like and what skills you might like and how you want to build them and play them, and you're not really punished for it too much. Whereas in PoE, of course, it's pretty fucking hard to make a build, especially early on, and you're gonna fuck it up, you're gonna fail, and then you're gonna have to try again. Here, it's a lot more forgiving and can be pretty satisfying in that regard as well. So to quickly go over like kind of the game and a bit of the systems and stuff, just a bit of TLDR as well. The campaign is a bit confusing. Lost Epoch, it's all, you know, like about time travel sort of stuff, which is kind of a cool concept. Like, you start out, you know, during a certain era of time, you know, let's just call it, you know, present time or something, and then the campaign, like, it might shoot you forward 1,000 years, shoot you forward a few hundred years, back a whole bunch of years, and then the very end of it. So during this campaign, it's pretty hard to like kind of follow along and, you know, keep up with what's happening. You're back, you're forward, you're this, you're that person's old, they're young. It can be a bit confusing, especially because, you know, most of it's through dialogue, just reading dialogue. If you're kind of like me, who's a bit special, reading doesn't sink in that well, that easy, so like you might be a bit lost sometimes. If it was all visual, you know, like cinematics, and I'm watching a movie, I typically keep up with time travel plots and stuff pretty easily, but with this I was a little bit lost here or there, and, you know, had to maybe reread some things, but I tried to go through it fairly quick. It's still fairly enjoyable to go through this campaign thing, and there's 9 acts in the end, and it'll take you something like, I don't know, 10-ish hours if you're doing it pretty, you know, methodically and just going through it normally. Something like that with this kind of a build, and then in the end you kill a boss, and then you start the mapping system, which is end of time. So you get like basically starting into like early white tier maps and then slowly build up into things that are going to be more like yellow tier and red tier maps. It's probably a bit easier to follow than a PoE map system, because you just, you know, go straight into a few zones, do a quick little objective, get a bunch of loot, move to the next zone, slowly progress, do a little quest chain, and then straight onto the next big zone. And eventually you get into higher and harder content. So given that it is a, you know, pretty new ARPG, it is probably one of the best launches, well, not launches, because the launch has been horrendous for online, but one of the best starts to an ARPG that you could have asked for, because the systems are really good, the gameplay is pretty good, the you know, character building, the specs are pretty good, but there's just not going to be anywhere near as much as a PoE at the moment, because PoE's had 10 years to build on. This game has built upon PoE, it's built upon your D2s, it's built upon previous stuff, but, you know, it's still in its early days. So every map or every zone you go into, there's going to be like unobjective. There's a couple of things to do in the end game, like the big sort of map system. There's some dungeons, a little arena or something. Whereas something like PoE, there's countless things to do, right? Because at this point, we've been around for a long time and we have like content bloat even. So I think it's promising. Like in the next few years, if they keep adding content and there's seasons and stuff, then this is definitely a game that you could probably come back to. So is it worth your money for the $40 to play it? If you're in some downtime from PoE right now, like you've played PoE, you know, you're a bit burnt out in the league, and you still want some RPG action, I'd say yes, this is worth your $40. You'll enjoy it. It'll be reminiscent of that, but different, and you'll learn some things through the systems that they've got, and you'll have some satisfying gameplay, you'll have some satisfying skills to try out, and then hopefully you'll come back to it later and have a different playthrough, and hopefully it builds upon it as well. It's not too bad for its, you know, for the price tag, $40. You get pretty much everything you'll ever need. There's some cosmetics that they'll sell later or something, but you get all your stash tabs. Your characters typically look pretty good just from the get-go, and it will provide you with some good fun for, I don't know, probably about 100 hours minimum, let's say, if you're really into it, because you'll make a few characters, you try a bunch of classes, you try a bunch of skills, you'll level up probably to 100, do the end game, and I think it should be worth your entry fee. So the character gearing, you pretty typically have similar gear to most ARPGs, but some prefixes, suffixes, you craft it yourself, you find it off the ground. The loot filter can be very powerful. I'd say careful not to make it too powerful, because with this sort of a filter, it's pretty easy to set up, but ultimately you might just like filter almost everything out outside of what you care and want about, and then you'll see no loot on the ground ever except for what you care about, and I think that's a bit more bland. You definitely want to see some crap loot every now and again as well, so I've got a very basic filter, and I still see loot. I check it sometimes and then I move on from there. But the loot itself, pretty interesting. There's some pretty interesting affixes. There's uniques, there's some legendaries, there's some set items, there's exalteds that are a bit higher tier than just rares, and you can craft them and customize them yourself. And like I said, they can be interesting because they can be pretty game changing, some pretty enabling, build enabling items and stuff where you might all of a sudden rethink the way you're going to build your character. Had something for my little build here, I can't remember where it is. This thing here, like found some sort of spear that all of a sudden makes me want to play some javelin action and build an entire javelin tree around that. Stuff like that. So the loot is pretty similar to PoE in like a lot of ways. You'll see that you can convert all of your damage to your fizz to fire or some shit and then do a fire build. You've got like, you know, bleed chance, you've got poison chance. The good stuff about bleed and poison in this game is, you know, sorry to just be all over the place, but there is kind of a lot to cover. Bleed and all these chances and stuff, if you go over 100%, instead of just capping at 100, you'll then have a chance to do 2 stacks of that thing at the same time instead. So if you've got 200% bleed chance, you'll apply 2 stacks of bleed every single hit. So investing more and more in that does feel kind of good. Your resists aren't super important, but they are still important. So, you know, without having fully capped resists, you're not going to get totally shit on. But ideally, you do want to be capping your resists as well. There are a lot of resists to cap, but they are pretty easy to cap because there's plenty on gear, plenty on your tree. And then, yeah, the crafting system. That's the thing a lot of people like and, you know, talk lots about. Basically, it's a bit more of a deterministic system than you might be used to if you're in PoE, where you can just kind of upgrade some of the mods you have. You can add some of the mods you might want. There's a little bit of RNG involved in it, and there's a little bit of like finding the right base item and finding the right materials for it, but then pretty typically you can kind of have the item you want at the end of the day with a little bit of RNG involved. But then getting to the highest tier items and the best items, there will still be more RNG involved. And like these boots, for example, have these 4 pink or red affixes on them. They did not exist before. This is a unique item that had bonus rolls on it, basically. it ended up having 20 extra level things that you do. So once you start going out and killing stuff, it would just randomly add extra stats on and then keep leveling them. And that's those 4 bonus stats in pink or red there. Whereas otherwise the boot itself is usually just those basic white stats on it. So can be pretty high roll, can be pretty low roll. There's going to be stuff you're chasing for. There's a bit of min-max to go for, and it's going to be pretty fun, I think, in that way. But the crafting system, pretty good base. Once you get a feel for it, it can be pretty similar to PoE. Like you've got some, you know, kind of like orbs that are going to upgrade, downgrade some of your stuff, that are going to help you craft some of your stuff. You got some other types of glyphs or runes that are kind of still like orbs as well. And then you've got your actual affixes themselves that you put onto the item. And, you know, you can upgrade, downgrade. That's the crafting materials page there. This is just stuff you're going to find throughout the game, lots of it. Or you can generate it from your item by just like destroying this item with a rune of shattering, and then you'll collect all of those affixes from that in smaller formats. There are relics, which is kind of like the D2 charm system. There is I'm not sure if there's anything else I really need to mention in that sort of aspect, other than just the build making itself. You start out with 5 classes. They're each going to have 3 ascendancy things, so there's lots to choose from. This is a Sentinel, which I went into Paladin, which is one of the 3 ascendancies, because it's pretty all-rounder. It's got some tankiness, it's got some good sort of resists and some throw damage, some healing, and then yeah, you just spec into some stuff as you level. Just a few choices to be made every few levels here or there. Pretty easy to do, pretty easy to be making your own choices. You get a skill every now and again as you're leveling up and as you're putting points in, and then each and every skill you have has its own separate passive tree. So it's just got a few choices you're going to end up making, and then some of them are pretty build defining, pretty build changing, like this makes my hammers go in a spiral. This, for example, will make the hammers cost more, do a bit more damage. This will just give me some extra stacks of like ignite and stuff. You can kind of build everything you want your own way to some extent, and as I said, it may be a bit overwhelming when you first pick up the game, because once you get a skill, you've got an entire tree and, you know, you've only got a few choices to make, but you need to know the entire tree to know what you're going to do, because if you start going towards this way, because these nodes look good, all of a sudden your things changed entirely and your build might not be what you wanted it to be. In any case, this is a pretty cool system. It's not super hard to understand. It's a little bit complex. There's a lot of combos. There's a lot of synergies. So there is. It's about as complex as you want it to be, as you want to make it. Like you can either just follow a guide and it's going to be pretty damn simple, and you'll have a nice character and have a nice playthrough, or you can build it yourself and go real deep and do a bit more customizing and hopefully come up with your own little creation. So yeah, some aura things, some javelin, some smite, which all of this kind of stuff is just as I picked up from random gear. I'd like pick up a piece of gear and go, ooh, maybe I can do something with that. Ooh, maybe I can incorporate that into a build. And then slowly over time, my build came together and started to do something. So that is basically the game. Do I think it's worth the money? Yep. Do I think it's worth your time? If you're not fully into PoE right now and you're still looking for something like that, yep, I do think it's worth your time. It's probably worth checking out, and I think it has a good foundation for going further in the future. I like what this is. I wish Diablo 4 was more like this, if I can say something like that, because I love angels, demons. I love Diablo as a base of, you know, Diablo 1, 2, my whole childhood and existence and all that. I love the IP so much, but then D4 itself is just so much of a safe play of just kind of relearning some steps that they've taken before, whereas this game feels like it's trying to take what was one of the best ARPGs and reinvent its own way around it, and give you something a bit different to explore, maybe something a bit easier, but something a bit different regardless. So that's what I'm saying. I wish D4 was more like that, something I could discover, something I could learn, and something I could appreciate as its own thing that is just trying to grasp your attention, trying to have you play it for the sake of playing it and not just have you buy it for the sake of buying it. So anyway, that's enough about that. Pretty good game, I think, thus far. After only playing it 3 days, I haven't gone fully into endgame, so, you know, maybe I get bored within a week if I go hard. Who the fuck knows? But for 3 days playtime, I've been pretty happy with it, and it's been pretty fun. The build itself that I am doing, very simple stuff. Went with hammers, using lunge as well, using holy aura, javelin, and smite. So I started out as a paladin. I just grabbed some like strength and res and armor, and these are basically the nodes that I've gotten so far. And then this one axe thing that does, I think, fuck all. And then once you start getting a paladin spec, I just grabbed all this sort of damage and stuff, some heal effectiveness, damage, healing granted, and then bleed stuff. So early on, I did pick up a weapon that had some bleed on it, and then every single time I did some hammers, I would stack bleed chance as well as shred armor, and then yeah, that was basically the build. On top of that, started lunging, and once you spec into lunge with some extra javelin stuff, you start lunging, hitting things, and then your javelin fires off as well. So I am wearing a spear, I have holy trail on my javelin, and I'll throw my javelin manually sometimes, and then sometimes whenever I dash, I'll also be chucking out an extra javelin. So my javelin does some damage, my hammer does some damage. That's the spec there. This is the aura that you have, which is just kind of like passive buff, but you can also press it to cleanse yourself. But for the most part, it's just passive buffing your character. That's the entire lunge spec. It's mostly meaningless. Most of this is just garbage, like I've just clicked some points here or there. And then the hammer spec is spiraling and doing some damage around that. And then the smite, the only reason we have smite is because I picked up a relic that has 4% chance to cast smite when I'm hitting with throw attacks. You can build fully into this if you've got many of these. I've just got one of these, 4% chance, so I built into smite, and what we have is just tried to make the smite do some kind of damage and consume some health and then not cost health and do some lightning and whatever the fuck. So that's the build. It's pretty simple. The gear itself, just some armor. Pick this thing up, which has some leech on it, some throwing damage. You're trying to get some throwing damage and throwing speed, and then a relic that does that too, and then some crappy droid belt. Not super complicated, not super hard to put together. If you're going to try this game out and you want something pretty simple and easy and like comfortable to go with, a hammer build like this goes very nicely, and it will get you as far as I've gotten without too much difficulty. But there are a lot of builds, a lot of fun stuff to do. I do encourage you to look at the classes and play styles and think, what would I like to do? And then try and just blindly go through it and see where the game takes you. So yeah, hopefully that's all the info you'll ever need from me for this game for now. Maybe I'll keep playing it and maybe another video if there's more to say. For now though, I've been having a good time. I do like the game. I didn't want to go super hard into it because I feel like there's more for the future and I'm not quite ready to fully sink into another ARPG. But in the future, hopefully I will when there's another big patch or launch. Either way, I'll probably still keep playing it for a bit, just not super hard. So with that, hope you guys are having fun too. Hope you like the little video and stuff. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.